Welcome back to the seminar, Science Cries Out, Creation. This is day 5, a bonus day. We're going to be looking today at events Babel and beyond, we might call it, and especially focusing today on looking at some of the evidence of dinosaurs and how do they fit in with this whole biblical model and the scientific model that we've been presenting for the last 4 days. If you've missed any of the previous talks, they're on replay, and you can get them. We'll have a notice out to you if you've signed up for the class. It's on the Discover Creation website, and so that will be available for you. Just a really quick review, what we've done these past 4 days, Genesis 1 and 2. We looked at Genesis 1 and 2 as the foundational evidence of creation. And when we look at the world around us, we see evidence of design in nature. That points back to the truth and the reality that there is an intelligent creator, that it didn't all just happen by chance and accidents. But then in Genesis 3 to 5, which we did on day 2 in this seminar, we looked at the idea of what happened to God's good earth. At the end of creation week, it was all very good. And now we look around and we go, it's not all very good. There's problems here. There's sickness and disease and death and thorns and thistles. What happened to God's good earth? And people will ask us many times, they can't believe in a God who would allow so much sickness and pain and suffering and so on. I think the answers start in Genesis chapter 3, where you start finding out what happened to this good earth. When Adam and Eve were given one rule, and of course they didn't abide by that one thing, and in the process, God had already warned them. He warned Adam that if you eat from that tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you will surely die. And from there on, that's what we've seen. And all through scripture and all through history and all through our civilization today, what do we see? And he died, and he died, and he died. We only know of 2 people in the scriptures that didn't die, Enoch and Elijah, who were taken directly up to heaven, but everyone else, all the rest of humanity has. And that stems back, all the way back to the beginning in Genesis chapter 3. Well, then yesterday, Wednesday, we looked at the fossil evidence, and we saw more evidence of death and decay. And on yesterday, we looked at Genesis 6 through 8, the results of sin. We see that as sin was allowed to continue and to grow, it multiplied and multiplied all over the face of the earth until wickedness and violence filled the earth. And God, I think, said enough is enough. You know, I don't know what words he used, but he told Noah, build an ark to preserve your family, and in a representation of all the animals that lived on the earth. And so yesterday, what we did was look at evidence that there really was a worldwide flood. And we see that evidence both in the rock layers themselves and in the catastrophic erosion that we see, the formations, the tectonic movements and the formations that we see after the time of the flood. We believe all that was laid down during and right at the end of the flood. And then today, what we're going to look at is Genesis 9 through 11. After Noah and his family got off the ark, God gave them a new covenant. He told them, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth, which was pretty much what he told them back in Genesis chapter 1, giving them a job to do. And the only difference was that he told them at this point, now the animals are going to be afraid of you. And now you're able to go ahead and eat meat the way that God had originally made everything to eat vegetables. And so as we look today, we're looking at the topic of Babel and beyond. After the flood, we know that there was this event that's called Babel. And so Dave's going to be talking about that whole thing after the flood, and that goes all the way up, scientifically goes all the way up to where we're at today, as far as this Genesis overview. And so we have Genesis 1 through 11 as a foundational understanding for what follows it, both in the Bible and its science. So Dave, let's talk about after this flood.
Okay, well, the whole world is covered with water, correct? Water is washing to and fro, back and forth across the earth. So there's a lot of heat being generated there. There's a heat being generated from undersea volcanism as well. And so the whole ocean is going to be a lot warmer than it is today. Kind of like an El Nino effect, we're going to see all kinds of weather changes as a result that are different than what we have even today. But the undersea volcanism was be a big one. You understand that there are so many volcanic basalt layers that are formed underwater that we see in the geologic record that would have warmed up the ocean basins. For instance, the Columbia basalts in the Northwest United States, that comprises 30,000 square miles of volcanic lava that had to form underwater, it seemed like, and then cool underwater. That means the water be warmer. The Deccan Plateau in India is even bigger, 3 times the size, covers 100,000 square miles. That's a pretty big boiling pot flame underneath this particular thing to warm up the oceans. So the oceans are going to be extremely warm. Now, why is this important? Okay. Well, because you have extremely warm oceans, you're going to have a lot of more water vapor that are going to produce various things. It's going to really lead to the events after the flood. But we also have perhaps somewhere in there within the flood and even right after the flood, big meteoritic strikes as well. That's all producing heat. When the water, if we had water in the atmosphere, if we had a lot of it at the time when the windows of heaven opened up, then that would produce some heat that went into the ocean as well. And so there's going to be a lot more rain because you have hot air masses coming off of that ocean, which is fairly warm. And eventually, land will cool down faster than water, and we're going to get a huge amount of rain even after the flood. And so all of that rain is going to start cooling down the land surfaces even more and more and more and much more differential. Dr. Larry Vardaman of ICR talks about conditions that there are almost catastrophic type of rainfalls going on even after the flood. Eventually, the land is going to cool down fast enough and you're going to end up with snow. And once it starts snowing, that means that the temperature is going to plummet frequently. And when it plummets, that's going to even cause more accumulation of snow. But keep in mind, that's very coming from the ocean, very moist. We're going to have huge amount of good type of snow that's going to be glacial material. All right. And that eventually is going to produce the ice age. And people ask us, how did the ice age start? Guess what? The secular models have a real difficult time explaining the ice age. And we don't, because we believe that the water was a lot warmer in the ocean, and that's what you need in order to have enough snow accumulation to advance those ice sheets. The snow turns to ice, etc. And so now what do we see? Great big ice sheets. We see just the remnants of that today, don't we? Remnants of those big ice sheets. Some of them are still melting. So we talk about global warming. Oh, yeah, there was some global warming. But in the past, we even had more global warming in the Middle Ages. And so we see that from the vegetation, et cetera. And so this isn't anything new. These are cyclic. And we know that in the Middle Ages, it wasn't man-caused global warming, that's for sure. We didn't have automobiles back then. Anyhow, so we then have all of these glacial ice sheets beginning to form, and they move. If they don't just stay in one place, when they get heavy weight on top of them, they begin moving outward. And I don't believe when we look at the geologic record that we have 5 different advances of the ice. What we're looking at is accumulation in the northern latitudes, like middle of Canada and the middle of continental areas, and in the high altitudes, etc. And now this ice spreads out radially like the spokes of a wheel. And when it radially spreads out, it's going to look like it's coming from different directions, but it's all part of the same ice age, depending on where you are doing the observation. But one of those glacial ice sheets basically move across and end up damming up the one fork of the Columbia River. And that formed that great big glacial Lake Missoula that I mentioned in the flood lecture. That collapsed, then the ice dam collapsed, causing a huge amount of erosion downstream. And the Dry Falls area inundated an area 100 by 200 square, 100 by 200 miles. Huge flooding that was going on there. And so can you imagine that? A huge inland sea that is maybe 2,000 feet deep at the dam, suddenly catastrophically breaking loose. And within 24 to 48 hours, you have all kinds of great big canyons being formed. Well, keep in mind that the ice in those sheets were up to 5 to 10,000 feet thick, up to 2 miles thick. That means there's a lot of water in those ice sheets. Okay, that's going to lower the sea level. We also see inland seas being blocked by these particular ice sheets, and that substantially increases more water up on top of the continents. And that's going to mean that after the flood, the ocean basins are going to have less water in it. That means we have out on the continental shelf, we have a lot of place for movement, huge land bridges. One of the evidences of all of that are the great big canyons that we see in several places out onto the continental shelf, indicating the water levels in the ocean were a lot lower in the past. Okay, so now that answers a question. How do the animals migrate? Well, look at the big land bridges. It's monstrous compared to the little tiny ones that secular scientists are saying. And no problem with moving back and forth after Noah's flood had been completed. So we see remnants of the shorelines. We see evidence of that big catastrophic flows in several different places around the world and several here in the United States. And so now you've got animal distribution. You have, I'm going to say, ice up on the northern latitudes, but guess one place that wasn't, you'd be surprised, was not glaciated. That's the North Shore of Alaska. Way up in the Arctic region, that was not glaciated at first. And the reason for it? Because there's so much water. And that water will temper the coastal areas, and which means you can have then the land bridges, even up there, people coming across those land bridges and actually having reasonably temperate climates. And so you could have mammoths that are just kind of chewing on buttercups along the coastal regions real easily. And then all of a sudden, that accumulation of snow and ice, all of a sudden the wind shifts and that cold blast of air comes down, and it can actually kill those particular mammoths pretty rapidly. And eventually they get trapped in ice. There's a lot of wind going on, a lot of turbulent weather, and there are sand blowing. And some of these mammoths are actually caught standing upright in sand. And it becomes very cataclysmic what was going on there, even after the flood. But a good share of the mammoths are actually buried in flood sediments. You've got the silts, you've got the sand, you've got the gravel deposits, etc. Even off the coast of eastern coast in Florida, etc. I know of people that actually collect mammoth fossils there. Those were probably distributed at the time of the flood. Others, we find mammoths frozen in ice, perfectly preserved in the flesh even. And so basically that happened as the weather patterns began to shift, and now trapping those particular mammoths after the wind shifts. All right, so we got all that. Now we're looking at the Babel and beyond. We find out in the Tower of Babel, people were told what? To spread out. They didn't. They'd be said, let's not do that. Let's go ahead and build a tower to reach unto heaven. And that basically sounded like possibility of worship of something other than the God of the Bible. And God said, enough is enough. I'm going to go down. We're going to confuse the languages and they'll have to spread out. And sure enough, languages were confused. People had to migrate different places because they couldn't communicate with each other. And depending on where they started, they ended up basically all over the world. The people in Mongolia, according to the museum up there, trace their actual heritage to a place in Turkey. That's probably somewhere close to where the Tower of Babel was, but close to Turkey, but their descendants did not come from Turks. And then their people group migrated up into present Mongolia. Parts of their people group migrated over into Korea. And others in their group, according to their Natural History Museum, migrated over the top of the world. That'd be over the Arctic region and the land bridges that we're talking about into the New World. And so consequently, we do see with all of this stuff, with the glaciation, with all of the lower sea levels, people groups migrating over, and there seem to be a few different thrusts of different people groups migrating, and they then settle. But they take their cultural characteristics with them. So we see similarities, not only in the looks, some in the languages, and also in their culture. In different parts of the United States even. You see the Navajo Indians and their sheep herders. We see their round hogans. Well, in Mongolia, what do you have? Round yurts, okay? And they're sheep herders, and they herd animals. And so we see the similarities and in culture and in their looks and in their languages due to the migration after the Tower of Babel. Well, today I want to also focus in on what happened to the dinosaurs. Okay, how do they fit with the Bible? Okay, Mary Jo and I were speaking in Costa Rica, and we had a group of young ladies that were actually making our slides appropriate for the Costa Rican audience. So they translated our slides, and in fact, for this particular lecture, they not only translated the slide, they came up with their own title. They called the title of this presentation, get this, Prehistoric Species and Humans. Well, I have a real question. What's prehistory? Everybody would say, oh, before history was written. But what does Genesis 1:1 say? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Hold on. That's where it all starts. There's nothing prehistory. We have it written right in the book of Genesis. And the only thing prehistory is God. Okay. And so when we say prehistoric species, like prehistoric animals, like dinosaurs, no, they're not prehistoric. They're actually historic. And we're going to be talking about that today. I didn't always believe that, of course. Here I am in the I think 4th or 5th grade, teaching on a Colorado television program how the study of fossils, dinosaurs, all proved evolution. And at that age, I can already teach it because that is all I had ever been taught. And I really believe that dinosaurs proved evolution. All right. I can remember talking about the geologic column in that particular television program. And one of the lines I used in there was, the rock layers of the earth formed the pages of Earth's history. Then I go into the evolutionary interpretation of it. It wasn't until later when somebody brought into Grand Junction, Colorado, a rather intriguing fossil. Brought it to the Gem and Mineral Club. I happened to be at Colorado State University at that time, but it was a backbone of a dinosaur with an arrowhead embedded in it. And I heard about it, but I just ignored it because that can't be possible. Everybody knows that dinosaurs were extinct millions of years before people came on the scene. So I just ignored it. It must be a hoax. Other people in the Grand Junction area actually saw it and said it's genuine. We have to deal with it. All right. And, but no, just didn't fit my paradigm that dinosaurs had their heyday in the Jurassic, died out about 65 million years ago, and people didn't come onto the scene until almost 2 million years ago. And that would have been ape-like creatures, which we dealt with in our last session. Okay, so they're separated by a lot of time. So that's why, because I believed in this evolutionary model, that's why I ignored that fossil. It wasn't until after I became a creationist that I wondered about that. And I went back to where it went on display in Grand Junction. And the owner had already sold his rock shop. And I asked him about that. He said, oh, yeah, I remember that fossil. I sold that. Oh, who did you sell it to? I wanted to trace it down. He said, well, I don't keep track of everybody I sell something to. And that was the end of the line for me. And so I didn't get to do it. Well, many people were like me. They learn evolution from a young age, possibly by looking at television programs. Many of these television programs talk about dinosaurs and how they fit into the evolutionary model. If they're not watching the TV, they're reading the books like I was. And all these dinosaur books. I also looked at all the different books when I found a dinosaur bone or a piece of a fossil or something like that to find out what I had found out in the desert. And guess what? Along with those textbooks that I was comparing my fossils to, I would also get a strong dose of evolutionary teaching. It wasn't until Mary Jo found that book for 5 cents in a secondhand bookstore that I began to think about this. Maybe what I was taught about evolution may not be true. Okay. And then later, that book was Evolution. The Fossils Still Say No. Okay. And etc. Well, in this whole background of what we've been talking about in this Science Cries Out creation, we were talking about that both stellar and biotic evolution are belief systems. And one of the belief systems is a worldview called naturalism, and it is posing as though it is science. It is a belief system that says everything in the universe has to be explained by natural processes without God. And so students are chained into believing that philosophy. And when they hear it often enough, evolution is science, creation is religion, pretty soon it sticks. And they end up, even if they grew up in a Christian home, they ended up believing in evolution. And many of them, 85%, according to statistics, have actually been shown that they leave the church by the time they're out of college. This is significant. This is a very important issue and an issue that you can get involved in, okay? So what about the dinosaurs? Well, dinosaur bones are dinosaur bones. They turned into rock, and the problem is not with the bones, it's over the interpretation of those bones. And that depends upon what color your filter is, okay? Now, somebody with a very much evolutionary filter, or maybe an anti-Christian bias, came up with this definition in a museum here in Colorado for a fossil. A fossil is any evidence of life more than 7,000 years old. I wonder how they came up with that number. Unless they're trying to combat the idea, some of the creationists are saying the Earth is only approximately 6,000 years old. And therefore, if we define a fossil at 7,000 years old, we can't have any creationist who's a paleontologist. I don't know if that was purposeful or just somebody's weird idea. In this session, we want to know, how do you know that about a fossil? We already asked, what's the evidence when you see great artwork, right? How do you know that? Well, here's a museum exhibit. It says Dilophosaurus and other dinosaurs were well suited to hot desert life where water is scarce. Okay, time out. Just because we find the bones of these creatures in the desert today, that does not mean they were living in a desert environment. Not at all. Oh, they may have been washed in there by some kind of flood, right? Very likely. And then the weather patterns changed. All right, according to the same museum exhibit, it says to conserve water, they didn't sweat. Time out. How do they know that? All you have is a pile of bones. There's a lot of good story mixed with those museum exhibits that help students learn facts that may not be facts or evolutionary indoctrination. Here's another exhibit, same museum in Grand Junction, actually Fruita, Colorado. It says T-Rexes, Tyrannosaurus Rex's primary prey were Triceratops and the duck-billed dinosaurs. Time out, how do you know that? How many dinosaurs, T-Rexes, have been found with Triceratops or another type of dinosaur in his stomach? If you answer 0, you're close. Okay, yeah, I think you're right on. And so this continued here too. It says T-Rex could consume a 2,000-pound meal. Okay, I could guess that because of the size of the creature and the size of the jaw. It says after such a hearty feast, T-Rex would not have to eat for 3 or 4 days and would spend his time napping. How do you know that? Again, separate story from actual facts. This is something we all have to do, especially kids when they're at the museums. All right. All right. Now at a museum, they'll actually show you a claw and say, hey, look at this claw. It was used for ripping flesh. And in fact, if you watch Jurassic Park, you had one of the dinosaurs using that claw just exactly that way. The star of Jurassic Park. And what do you know about a claw if you haven't seen the animal in action? You can't. Those are big claws. Oh my, that's a vicious creature. Not really. That claw belongs to a blue jay. It's his foot. It's not very a vicious creature at all, but look at those claws. Now, don't have nightmares. Here's another creature with great big claws. Oh, no. No, he's pretty tame. In fact, he uses those claws not to fight each other, but to tear his way or fight his way into a honeycomb. That's the original Pooh Bear, okay? Or Honey Bear. All right, look at those big claws. Yep, that belongs to the sloth. And again, fairly docile. He uses those big claws to be able to hang upside down on a tree limb and actually could take a good nap doing so. Those claws can be locked into place. So you can't tell much about claws from and what the creature did with it. This was a science article here, and they say that this particular creature they found, because of the type of tooth, which they're extrapolating a little bit, but they said it was a vegetation eater. But look at the big claws. That doesn't fit. No, those claws, they said, were probably for pulling down limbs so it could reach to the tops of those branches and get its nice leaves to eat. And so you don't know what the claws are being for. I was at, I think, Peabody Museum, Yale Museum. I was giving a tour there, creation tour of the museum, much to the chagrin of the people there that ran that museum. But the guy in front of me would hold up a tooth, the one who gave a class meeting that was in there. He held up a tooth and said, "What kind of food did this creature eat?" And all the kids, because they've been primed already, would say, "Meat. That was a meat eater." Well, maybe. We don't know that. We don't know that unless we could see T-Rex in action. The only way to tell for sure what T-Rex would eat is to take him to McDonald's restaurant. Find out if he orders a chef salad or the chef who made the salad. Okay, that might be more definitive. Well, we can't do that, but we can look at the fossil evidence, and we find out in the fossil record at the same place in the layers that we find some of the dinosaur remains. We find these giant type of armored, we call them cycads, but they sure look like giant pineapples. If you've ever tried to bite into a pineapple, you know it's going to take a pretty good set of sharp steak knives in your mouth to be able to do it. Well, you don't have those. You get a world of hurt if you bite into a pineapple without slicing it first. So maybe, I don't know, I wasn't there, I didn't see it. T-Rex liked those particular type of plants, and they needed the sharp teeth to get into them. We don't know because we weren't observing that particular dinosaur at the time. We can only surmise what it was. This is a skull. Look at those big teeth. No, it's not a meat eater. It's a fruit bat. It eats and peels its favorite kind of food or fruit with those particular big teeth. These teeth belong to the nectar bat. No, it's not a meat eater. This spider monkey happens to have great big teeth as well. Again, what does it use it for? Eating fruit. Panda's favorite food happens to be bamboo, and yet they have some pretty good sharp teeth. Sure enough, if a mouse happened to run by him, or a rodent, they'd probably grab him. But his favorite food appears to be bamboo shoots. Okay, we don't know. Maybe T-Rex should be called the great big terrible melon eater. Like I said, we weren't there. We don't know that for sure. And we do notice when we look at dinosaur manure, which is now turned into the rock, it's called coprolite. When they've taken thin sections, they found out a lot of the dinosaurs, at least in that locality where that is found, all ate plants. They weren't necessarily meat eaters. Okay, when did dinosaurs live? I asked a public school, you'll get almost 100%. Oh, millions of years ago. If I asked in Christian school, the majority will say millions of years ago. Homeschoolers, you have many of them saying, thousands of years ago. Very big difference in their education. They're being indoctrinated, remember, in evolution at young ages in many, many different schools. But let's see what the Bible says. God created man on day 6 of creation, correct? But on day 6, he also created the land animals. Many of the dinosaurs we look at from this historical record called the Bible, they're land animals too. So man and dinosaurs may have lived together according to Genesis chapter 1. Now that is heresy, isn't it? No, not really. But that's basically what the biblical record says, and it's an historical record. All right, that would fit with the idea that people and dinosaurs saw each other. One may have been hunting each other, the other. It's a possibility. Did they really live millions of years ago? Well, they found unfossilized dinosaur bone in Alaska. You're not going to preserve that for very long. Not millions of years. at all. Otherwise, it would have totally decayed. Now they found, like I said the other day, soft tissue in dinosaurs and red blood cells, etc. In fact, how was that discovery received by the secular community? Keep in mind, this is somebody who still believed in evolution who found it. She had tried to get her data published. She said, I had one reviewer tell me that he didn't care what the data said. He knew what I was finding, soft tissue in dinosaur, wasn't possible. I wrote back and said, well, what data would convince you? And he said, none. That reminds me of a conversation we had with a university professor in Iowa one time. We spent 5 hours with this professor, and I was giving him one evidence after another evidence for creation and the problems with evolution, and he wasn't even buying any of it. So I finally asked him, well, what evidence would you accept? He said, none. He didn't have a problem with the evidence. He had a problem with his will. And I should have asked them that question 5 hours before. Okay, would have saved a lot of time. Some people are totally closed to the possibility that evolution may have some problems. All right, I was given a lecture on dinosaurs at the university at one time, and I had a professor stand up and shout out, or when I got to the point of saying there was now soft tissue and red blood cells found in dinosaur remains, he said, it's just biofilm, which means it came a lot later. Well, guess what? That is proven totally wrong. And evolutionists have been scrambling, okay, to try to come up with different explanations. The next year, the same professor was in one of my lectures, and I mentioned the soft tissue in dinosaurs, and he just was mum. He didn't say a word. He actually must have gone over and looked at the evidence. All right, so biofilm was wrong. Later, somebody suggested, the bones were encased in lots of hemoglobin, providing iron, which could preserve the particular soft tissue. Okay, answer. They did an experiment. They found out if you put ostrich tissue into concentrated hemoglobin, you can preserve that particular tissue for a couple of years. Well, guess what? A couple of years is a lot of difference between it and millions of years. But remember, I also said yesterday, I said that the fossils have been found now in the Cambrian that are supposedly over 500 million years old, and they too have soft tissues in it. Well, 2 years is a far cry from millions and millions of years, isn't it? By the way, iron is not even present with some of the fossils at all. And they use concentrated hemoglobin. I think you're going to find that in the lab, but not necessarily in a natural environment, even when a dinosaur dies. And not only that, you're going to have to keep, according to the experiments that they did, you're going to have to keep that tissue totally dry, but bury it deeply and rapidly. However, many of these particular dinosaurs have been found in what they call river deposits. That's not dry. And when it's buried in there, there's still so much groundwater going through there. So the real evidence would not support this type of lab type exercise. All right. So yeah, I think you want to pick up that book, one of the few books that talk about the soft tissue and dinosaur, and also an amazingly good book on dinosaurs for kids and for adults is your Guide to Dinosaurs. You can get it at discovercreation.org and go to that website and look at our bookstore. I highly recommend that book. All right. When I was a kid, I used to grind and polish petrified dinosaur bone. Once in a while, I'd get this rotten egg smell. Well, guess what? I was grinding through soft tissue that was still rotting. I did not understand the significance of that when I was 14, 15 years old. But we made a lot of jewelry out of petrified dinosaur bone. But it's interesting what you can do. Look at this black stuff around these cells, the bone cells of this petrified dinosaur bone. Wow, we can date that. So they've decided to carbon date dinosaur bone. And instead of millions of years, they ended up with only thousands of years. Something's wrong with the dating method, right? Or maybe the dating method's okay, partly, but their assumption of the millions of years would be wrong. And I think that might be the case. And this has happened many, many times. People said, well, maybe groundwater contaminated this. Okay, that's possible. And so they also found the same thing in coal deposits that were thought to have been millions of years old, but they come up with thousands of years. And so that didn't work. One substance that is made of pure carbon that you could probably date by carbon dating is diamonds. Groundwater doesn't go through it. So they crushed down some diamonds. Guess what? They didn't find millions of years like they expected. They found only thousands of years. Again, indicating maybe this Earth isn't quite that old. Okay. All right. Now they actually found in this particular article that they found the Medusa effect, instantaneous fossilization. How long does it take to make a fossil? It says instant sometimes. He said in this research that for a few fish whose gills were mineralized in apatite, this type of mineral, the fossilization, lithification was instantaneous. And fossilization may have been the cause of death, not something that came afterwards. That's kind of intriguing, isn't it? What does the Bible say about when dinosaurs were around? Job 40 talks about behemoth. I believe it's talking about a dinosaur. And in fact, it goes on, Job of chapter 40. Behold, behemoth, which I made with thee. He moves his tail like a cedar. He is the chief of the ways of God. Okay, so he's big, he's monstrous. What is he? Well, I believe it's a dinosaur. Moves his tail like a cedar. Some people said it's big. How about an elephant? But when I look at the back end of an elephant, that tail is not a cedar tree. When other translations actually said behemoth is probably a hippopotamus, and they translated it that way. Well, the hippopotamus tail is almost non-existent. Okay, there it is. I wouldn't call that a cedar tree, but I would call this one a cedar tree, the tail of a dinosaur. So was Behemoth a dinosaur? I believe he probably was. All right. We find also people having seen those beasts, not only in the biblical record, because God is talking to Job about something evidently Job knew about, and it might have been a dinosaur. Or was it a dragon? I believe dinosaurs and dragons were one and the same thing. And I ask people sometimes, do you believe in dragons? Oh, no, no, no. I said, well, let me give you the classic definition of a dragon. A dragon is a large reptile. Now, Hermione believe in dragons, and reluctantly we get the students. Okay, you got me. All right. Anyhow, we also find evidence of people having killed these dragons. Gilgamesh epic talks about slaying a great big creature called a dragon, and it sounds like from the description, maybe that type of dinosaur right there. All right, cool. Could those dragons breathe fire? Maybe. I wasn't there. I didn't see him do it. But Job chapter 41, a historical record now, talks about Leviathan. And in that particular chapter, it says his breath, Leviathan's breath kindles coals and a flame goes out of his mouth. Either that guy had extremely bad breath or he could actually breathe fire. And quite honestly, if we have other types of creatures that we think might have been dragons. We find these things in the fossil record. And like that guy right there, look at the size of him. Was he a crocodile or was he a vicious water serpent? Maybe a candidate for Leviathan. Now, those had tightly overlapping scales on them. That fits the biblical record of it. And the size of it, monstrous, okay? And I don't think I'm going to draw him out with a fish hook at all. Well, if a little bombardier beetle can actually mix two chemicals together and produce a fiery explosion, then I believe some of the big dinosaurs, like the boneheads, could actually use that bonehead skull as a chemical mixing tube and actually produce the same kind of results, but on a grander scale. And keep in mind, you look at the cross section of the skull of that dinosaur, and you find out that sure enough, it actually would work as a chemical mixing tube to produce fire, which can come out of his mouth or even his nostrils. I wasn't there. I didn't see him in action. But I do know that many cultures around the world talk about dragons that could breathe fire. And by the way, we have a missionary by the name of Marco Polo who visited China in 1271 AD. He reported the emperor raised dragons to pull his chariots in parades. What does that tell me? They were big. And they were called dragons, large reptiles, right? St. George had got his fame as known as the Dragon Slayer. All right. Every one of the dragons and artistic plates of him shown killing a dragon is either a dinosaur looking body shape or it could be one of the pteranodons or pterosaurs, which is known from the fossil record. And we have enough to say, I'll bet that's what he killed. Okay, very much. Even in the North America, in Southwest near Blanding, Utah, is the Natural Bridges National Monument. And I take students there because it's very important to see things. You actually, on the hike down, get to see Indian, ancient American dwellings of the Anasazi, and at least 1,000 to 2,000 years old. And here's Alan Galbraith here, standing next to one of these. Again, this is on the hike down to this natural bridge right here. And when you look on the side of the natural bridge where the green arrow is, I'm going to lighten up that so you can actually see what it looked like, is a dinosaur-looking creature. Perhaps they saw that. In the actual picture, you actually see an arch-like, indicating that this thing is about the size of that arch, which would be a monstrous Apatosaurus type dinosaur. Maybe so. All right, but you find other drawings too. This is again in Havasu Canyon, a side canyon of the Grand Canyon. And there you find this Indian drawing of what looks exactly like a Trachodon. It looks exactly like it. And Edmontosaurus is called. What were the people seeing to make such a very accurate description and a picture of that, unless they may have seen the real thing? Near the Grand Canyon, Wapatki National Park in Arizona, they have what you call Puff the Magic Dragon. And you see this dinosaur-shaped body, but actually belching out fire and smoke. Is it real? I would believe so. This is out of a Middle Age depiction, and they're killing this creature that looks just like one of the pterosaurs. Somebody said whoever drew that picture must have seen the real thing, because that's exactly what we would reconstruct it from the fossil record. And so that was in Middle Ages. Prayer stick in Manitou, Colorado, at a museum. Again, look at the skull, just like the pteranodons, okay? All right, Then there's the Thunderbird design, where the Western writers were actually seeing this particular creature. We have the American Indians that actually are Native Americans that actually got the idea of their Thunderbird jewelry design from a creature that they actually observed. And it looks just like a pteranodon as well. This is out of an Asian collection. Again, it's out of ceramic, but look at that. It looks exactly like what famous paleontologist Bakker says Oviraptor ought to look like. Exact image of what you're looking at. And so I think in 1400 AD, they knew about these creatures as well. Amazon River Basin. These guys are hunting, using spears, etc. What are they hunting? Looks like a long-necked dinosaur right there. Are these guys hunting Corythosaurus, or is it Big Bird from ancient Sumatra? Okay, again, ancient records showing these particular dinosaur-like creatures. This is an ornamental box, and you look at these exactly like our Apatosauruses. Again, these guys are hunting what's called the Nile crocodile leopard here. And again, we have that in the fossil record, and it's called the type of dinosaur. But this is recent, isn't it? This is a mosaic in the flora in Israel. If you take off the ears, which aren't preserved in the fossil record, guess what? You have another type of dinosaur we know from the fossil record. I believe they're hunting these things. They probably called them dragons. This is the Mesopotamian cylinder from before Christ, at least in their dates. And it looks like it depicts on this metal cylinder all of this, whoa, dinosaurs. Those are dinosaurs. It'd be easy to see. Peruvian burial stones, again, about 1,000 years old, some depicting dinosaur-like creatures. Now, there are a lot of fakes now out there in Peru because people said, if you find one of those, I'll pay you big money for it. And now they made a whole bunch of fakes. But there were actual Peruvian burial stones, according to a photographer friend who says, I can tell the real from the fake very easily. And he says he had actually saw these things that had dinosaurs on them. This is the temple in Cambodia that was actually constructed, they think, 1,000 to 1,100 years ago. And wait a minute, these are columns of rock. And on it, they carved different animals. One of the animals is that guy right there, and that looks like a stegosaurus. Were they looking at these type creatures in the ancient jungles of Cambodia? I have no problem with thinking that whatsoever. This is off of a mosaic here as well, again, depicting that particular type of a dinosaur. In Mexico, they found all kinds of clay images of what look like stegosauruses, people fighting these creatures, tyrannosauruses, not T-Rexes, but pteranodons, etc. And again, what are we looking at? People must have seen those things, okay? This is Bishop Bell's tomb engraving. Around that entire engraving is a brass strip that have dinosaur-like creatures that look like that particular type of dinosaur right there, one of the long neck sauropods. All right, some people say, wait a minute, dinosaurs aren't extinct. We have records of somebody talking about, or ancient people, not ancient, modern people talking about a creature which they have seen in the jungles in the Congo. And people have looked at that and they said, oh, it couldn't be a dinosaur. But the natives pointed to a picture of a Apatosaurus, a Brontosaurus, and said, guess what? That is what we saw. That's the animal. And they danced around the picture of a creature like that and said, this is the creature. All right. Interesting article came out. And they're giving a lecture. And here is a a professor actually given a connection between dinosaurs and dragons. And oh my, could you have heard the flack that this person was getting? And yet she was called a dinosaur historian. And here's what they said. Oh my, Stanford fossil historian links dinosaur bones to mythological creatures. Maybe they're not mythological. Maybe they're real creatures instead. Well, they found the bones of a creature called Dracorex. And they look at the horns, etc., of Dracorex, and they look at the skull and say, that's exactly like the dragon that we commonly call Dracorex today. All right. And must have been a dragon. And we would call it a dinosaur. But that's the bone. That's what they call it, Dracorex hogwartsia. Okay. But those would be just the nubs. The horns would grow out from those, just like a cow horn would grow out. Okay. So the real animal, before they lost their horns, would have big long horns on there. In fact, they said the skull looks strangely familiar to anyone who has studied dragons. And they look like the same dragons you find where? China, medieval Europe. And people said, oh, the people in medieval Europe must have seen the bones of Dracorex. And then that led to the mythology of this particular dragon. Except for one thing. Where was Dracorex found? North Dakota. That's a long ways from China. Okay. And so, yes, I think people saw those things in living 3D dimension. Okay. In fact, we have a great book here at the office that you can pick up, Dragons, Legends and Lores of Dinosaurs. All right. I love that book. Very much fun book for younger people, but adults are enjoying it equally as well. But again, look at that particular dinosaur. Boy, that looks like what they found. All right. Why were they so big? We don't know. Perhaps the conditions on the earth were different. Perhaps there was somewhat of a water vapor canopy, or maybe a heightened, you might say, well, the canopy itself would produce a tremendous greenhouse effect, and maybe give some waters for the flood. But remember, flood waters came up also from the fountains of the great deep. But if there was a little bit, it would block out a lot of harmful radiation. But there's a possibility that it would produce longevity as well because of the increased oxygen, the harmful radiation blocked out. And remember, Methuselah lived to be 900 years old, right? Quite the long lifespan. Well, dinosaurs have what are called indeterminate growth. That means they keep growing as long as they live, okay? And that might explain why they got to be so big, okay? And if they could live as old as Methuselah, how big could they get? Others have suggested that basically there was a much greater magnetic field in the past. And a greater magnetic field would give us a bigger Van Allen belts, which we know today blocks a lot of harmful radiation coming into planet Earth. And we believe that harmful radiation can produce certain effects which will lead to diminished lifespans. And we also know from 160 years at least of research that our magnetic field has been decreasing at a very predictable rate. And that also gives you an upper limit on the potential age of the Earth in terms of thousands of years, not millions of years, by the way. Well, the patriarchs lived 900 years or more. Something happened at the time of the flood where all of a sudden the people in the Bible record didn't live as long. That could have been the collapse of the canopy, could have been all of a sudden where the magnetic field began to decrease. We're not sure of that, but these are ideas that have been thrown out, okay? And so why were they so big? Again, indeterminate growth. It wasn't just dinosaurs that were bigger. We found ammonites that actually a squid lived in. Those shells were as big as a large tractor Kyer. Whoa. We have found roaches in the fossil record that would have been a very long, uh, 45 centimeters. Okay, those are pretty good sized roaches, aren't they? You'd use those as a footstool instead. Sea spiders, and that's a quarter. That thing's over a foot long. Wow. Beavers, up to 7 feet long. And that wouldn't take much to chop down your tree in your front yard with a beaver that size. Well, they have a lot of ideas of what killed those dinosaurs and it caused them to go to extinction. One, they were killed by mammals. Two, climate change. Well, yeah. if you had any kind of canopy whatsoever, the climate would have changed. Ice age would have caused a lot of issues with it too. Maybe a meteor strike. Yeah, those are all possibilities. But usually the textbooks never mention that there was a flood that killed most of the dinosaurs. But I'm going to say most because not all of them were killed. God said, take two of every kind of animal. I would think that would include dinosaurs as well. And remember in an earlier lecture that those particular flood legends or flood accounts are found all the way throughout the world, with even 300 of them found in from the Native Americans. Okay. Well, wait a minute. Skeptics say, how did Noah get those big old dinosaurs on board that boat? Well, they weren't always big. Okay. They weren't always big. This is the picture that we get in kids' books and cartoons of a little tiny boat. Well, it turns out that boat wasn't tiny. It was a monstrous boat, like I said in one lecture, at least 1.5 to 2 football fields in length. Plenty big for even full-grown dinosaurs to go on board that particular boat. And by the way, you didn't need that many dinosaurs. You take 2 of each kind, and there's only a few types of kinds of dinosaurs. And there's a lot of variation within those kinds of the different horned dinosaurs, etc. But we do think from the fossil record that those dinosaurs were pretty small at one time. In fact, we have eggs of dinosaurs and they're only 18 inches long. That means they're cute and cuddly. So why not take a young dinosaur on board that boat, not the full grown ones? Okay, I'm going to pause this for just one moment.
One of the things I like to ask college students is when they tell me that they are so objective and that everything that they've, they evaluate everything through science and so objectively. And I like to ask them at times, when did you first learn about evolution? And they'll usually tell me probably high school or college. And I ask them, wait, no, I think it goes further back than that. When did you first learn about evolution? Did you read dinosaur books? And so I talk to these college students and I say, you already got evolution when you were 3 or 4 years old. You didn't know it was evolution. You didn't know you were being primed to believe in evolution. But I believe that most children here in the States, at least, get indoctrinated in evolution by the cute little kids' books that get read to them. Kids, so many of them are fascinated with dinosaurs before they ever even become school-aged. And so they're already learning there that dinosaurs lived millions and millions of years before human beings. And then they all died off before the people evolved. And they're taught, even in those books for little kids, they're taught about how the dinosaurs evolved into the birds and so on. And so I think that the dinosaurs is the first way in which children at a very young age get exposed to evolution. So, well, back to Dave's talk now.
Okay. Well, rarely do we ever hear that the dinosaurs may have perished, at least most of them, in a flood. And the reason I say most of them is that all of those different pictures that I showed you are all post-flood pictures found on areas where the flood has already occurred. And these are civilizations, etc., from around the world, all seeing these type of creatures after the flood. I like Gary Larson's idea that he wrote in a cartoon, shows a pack of dinosaurs smoking cigarettes, and said the real reason dinosaurs became extinct is they took up smoking. You know, scientists really don't know what killed the dinosaurs, but I believe a lot of them died in the flood. After the flood, they became a nuisance. And what do we see? Maybe it became the in thing to kill a dinosaur. And that's why Saint uh, yeah, that's exactly why we find out people got fame and to slay a dinosaur. It became the in thing. If you want to show your manhood, guess what? You needed to go out and kill one of those dragons. All right. And most of the young guys would say, if I have to kill a dragon to get the fair hand of that maiden over there, she's so cute, then I'm going to go kill a dragon. I'm going to risk my life. And as soon as it becomes the in thing, you're going to drive the creature to extinction. Maybe you could feed the family for a whole week on one dinosaur leg or dragon leg, right? St. George, again, remember, got his fame killing dragons, okay? And he was, National Geographic says, no, dinosaurs aren't even extinct. They just evolved into birds. Look for them at your bird feeder. Oh, that sounds really good. Dinosaurs take wing. That was on their front cover. And then inside that, they showed all kinds of pictures of the dinosaurs with feathers. But the problem was the fossils you see just fuzz. You don't see feathers. And it's easy to see a feather even in the fossil record. But when they started popularizing this in National Geographic about dinosaurs taking wing, Storrs Olson, who was a bird expert and fossil expert at the Smithsonian, said it this way. He accused the magazine of engaging in sensationalistic, unsubstantiated tabloid journalism. Clearly, he wrote, the magazine is not receiving competent consultation in certain scientific matters. And then he is especially galled or maddened by the society's assertion that a wide variety of dinosaurs definitely wore feathers. He said, this is just a, well, let's call it a blankety blank lie, he says. There is not one undisputed example of a dinosaur with feathers. The public deserves to know this. Oh, and then we have Alan Fiducia, University of North Carolina. He said, when they put that feathered dinosaur in the cover last year, I threw 30 years worth of magazines out of my house. National Geographic's journalism is a joke. So the hair-like filaments that accompany some fossils come from beneath the skin. I can duplicate the effect by skinning the tail of a modern lizard. I just don't do that. Take his word for it. All right. Now, again, these are people that somehow still have an evolutionary idea, but they don't like it when they are actually promoting something that they think is false. Okay. All right. Remember that particular picture of you might have seen in National Geographic, a flying dinosaur? Wow, that looked really good. And all those gorgeous big old feathers, that's all artwork. And you see, here's what they reconstructed from the filament. But it turns out that this fossil was not just one little piece of fossil. It was a composite of 5 different fossils put together by a Chinese resident and then sold to a museum. Turned out to be a hoax, and there's the article that stated, scientists dispute missing link fossil. Anyhow, there it is. Since that time, many of the others have actually fallen out of the sky as well. Again, several different hoaxes coming out of that same province of China. Okay, we find this one. And published in 2000. Last year, Nature published a paper by Kevin Padian. He's one of the guys that's been pushing this dinosaur to bird evolution. But Kevin Padian at Berkeley on a pterosaur with the tail from the same fossil deposit where Archaeoraptor was found. Zoo says the tail was added by a local resident before selling it to a Chinese museum. Again, another hoax to add into it. The National Geographic actually showed how a dinosaur was going to evolve into birds. All right. Then they show you a path to dinosaurs, and they actually call certain fossils. But keep in mind, there's a lot of artwork that is entailed in reconstructing those things. They show you in the picture how a wing could have evolved. And they show a leg eventually getting more and more feathery. They actually put names on it to make it look a little bit more believable. And sure enough, now you have a modern wing. That's speculation. And that's good artwork. There's a problem with that. They show modern birds way over here today in their lineup, right? Well, sure enough, that's where you expect to find it. But our artist at Alpha Omega Institute at the time, Mark Sonmore, actually tore that thing apart and showed you the real order of where these fossils were found. Yes, you find birds today, and wait a minute, you find dinosaurs before those birds, but wait a minute, we have dinosaurs here. Whoa, we have birds here. We have birds here. We have birds here. And even before the dinosaurs, it looks like we have birds. You can't be your own grandmother. Okay, so this bird's supposedly evolving into dinosaurs. No, birds are already flying around. So the question is, what do the scientists say? Well, Kevin Padian states like this: no problem. We don't always get everything in the fossil record in perfect order. I say there is a problem. So we can talk about a lot of these things. They have the wrong type of a lung system, etc. Remember, the struggles over the interpretation of the data. Actually, so I'm going to ask you this question. Did dinosaurs evolve into birds? I'm going to say no. They actually found the bones of a dinosaur, but it had 3 birds in its stomach. These dinosaurs weren't evolving into birds, they were eating them. So that tells you that evolutionary perspective of it is wrong. Well, when we look at dinosaurs, they fit the biblical record too. And what happened to the dinosaur fits wonderfully with the flood as well. Why do we have dinosaurs here? Well, because they're not only found in the fossil record as evidence of the flood, but they're found in modern world as they repopulated and then became a nuisance and were killed by people who wanted to get rid of them, and possibly an in thing to kill a dinosaur. You know, when I talked about the flood yesterday, I said when I found out the flood geologically is well substantiated and that science supports it, and yet the flood is the most contested book in the Bible, or chapters of the Bible, guess what? And if it's reality, I found out, well, guess what? I better believe the rest of the Bible too. And God sends judgment, and most of the dinosaurs perished in that judgment of the flood. My advice to anybody out there is don't give up the biblical record because of the modern supposed new article that comes out in the Science magazine or one of the other ones. We're in a battle of beliefs, battle of worldviews. And to conclude this particular Science Cries Out Creation seminar, I want to remind you that evolution and naturalism is not science. It's a philosophy of how we got here on Earth, and yet it is posing as if it were science. Stand firm on God's word. We don't need man's word, man's idea whatsoever. Okay? So dinosaurs do fit. Visit our website, discovercreation.org. Okay? And remember, if you want to sign up for a tour of geologic tour, we give tours throughout the Canyonlands, tours of Colorado National Monument, etc., which is just right there at our home base in Grand Junction, Colorado. We give Yellowstone tours. We really encourage you to come. We have openings still left on our Yellowstone tour. And that's coming up August 26th is our first one. And then 1 week later, on a Friday, we start our second tour over the Labor Day weekend. What a fabulous place to bring your family to. And people say, oh, gas prices are too high. Well, guess what? They've come down quite a bit right now. I'm expecting they're going to come down even further, but especially before elections. Uh, anyhow, regardless of that, come to the tour. Even if the gas prices were $2 more and you had a 1,000-mile round trip, it's only going to make a difference of $70 to $100 total in your travel. Your family is certainly worth that. So come to Yellowstone and get a creation tour of Yellowstone National Park. If you can't, you could go online and go to the App Store and look for Yellowstone National Park Tour. We have a Creationist Tour, a Yellowstone app, and the Colorado National Monument Tour. They're now done, completed, and ready for you to download onto your phone. So you can sit at home and take a tour, although coming in person is definitely much more exciting. So join us, okay? One of our Yellowstone tours coming up. Make sure you sign up for that. Call the AOI office, 970-523-9943. All right. Then Costa Rica. Look for that coming up in March of 2023. But we need to gauge your interest so we can figure out when to be able to do it. We believe probably in the first part of March, but let's gauge your interest. Do you wish to come to a Costa Rica and get a creation tour? If so, call our office or write an email to aoi@discovercreation.org or call 970-250-2923. That's my cell phone. But call, if that doesn't answer, call 970-523-9943. Okay. Sign up for our free publication, Think and Believe. Let us know of your interest. But in all things, discover creation, worship the God of creation. God bless you guys. Thanks for joining, whether you're in person or picking up on our replays.